Why is it that some people are still here, past 60, past 70, past 80, when many of their peers have already gone home? Why has God kept certain men and women breathing, waking up each morning, watching the years roll forward while the world around them changes, ages, and shifts? Why has God kept you or the elders you love alive beyond the age, when many believe their purpose has already been spent? There is a question that echoes quietly in the halls of many hearts. Lord, why am I still here? Some ask it with gratitude, some with confusion, and others with a silent ache, wondering if the latter years of life still carry meaning, assignment, or divine intention. Culture often whispers that the elderly are past their usefulness, but heaven does not speak that language. God does not measure purpose by youthfulness, nor relevance by physical strength. The breath in your lungs is the evidence that heaven has not closed the chapter of your calling. But beneath that surface level question lies something deeper, a spiritual mystery, a divine logic, a biblical pattern. God never keeps someone on this earth just because. There is always intention behind his preservation. There is always purpose behind his timing. And there is always a reason, often hidden, to why a person's life is extended when others are not. You may think your best days are behind you. You may feel forgotten, overlooked, or slowed by the weight of years. But what if God has kept the elderly alive? Because the greatest assignment of their journey is not behind them, but ahead. What if the later years carry a mantle earlier years were not mature enough to carry? What if heaven has kept you because someone's deliverance, someone's breakthrough, someone's salvation is tied to the wisdom, endurance, and spiritual authority you gained across decades? There is a shocking truth buried in Scripture about why God preserves certain lives far past 60. And today we are going to uncover it. Before we uncover the mystery, let us acknowledge something quietly powerful. Longevity in Scripture is never random. Whenever God extended a person's years, it was prophetic, it was strategic, it was woven into a larger plan that stretched beyond their individual life. Noah lived long because the world needed a preacher of righteousness in a generation drowning in wickedness. Moses lived long because the nation needed a steady hand and a seasoned spirit to guide them out of bondage. Anna the prophetess lived long because she had one assignment: to witness the Messiah. And her old age became the very stage heaven used to fulfill that purpose. In every era, God preserved elders because their presence carried weight in the spiritual realm. Heaven knows the value of years lived, battles fought, prayers prayed, tears shed, testimonies gathered, and wisdom earned. Wisdom that cannot be downloaded, accelerated, or cheaply gained. When God keeps someone beyond 60, it is because their life has evolved from merely being a story to becoming a vessel, a witness, a spiritual archive. But here is the part many overlook. The later years are often the years when God softens the heart to understand things the younger version of you would have resisted. These years become fertile soil for deeper revelation, gentler obedience, and a greater listening posture. God keeps the elderly because he has shaped them into instruments that can carry truths, warnings, blessings, and impartations that the younger generations desperately need. And yet, this is where the mystery intensifies. Many people reach 60 or 70 and feel spiritually disconnected. They say, I used to hear God more clearly, or I don't feel his nearness like I once did, or my purpose feels finished. If you or someone you love has ever felt that way, understand this. Silence does not mean abandonment. Stillness is not rejection. When God appears quiet in one season of your later years, it is often because he is preparing you to release something in the next. A preserved life is often a life being positioned. In fact, if you've ever wrestled with God's silence at 60, at 70, or even earlier, you need to dive deeper into the devotional, When God is Silent, which I've placed in the pinned comment for you. It is for those who feel God's quiet seasons most intensely, especially in these transitional years when identity, purpose, and legacy collide. That devotional will open your understanding to why God sometimes pulls back his voice before revealing a mandate. But right now, in this moment, God is pulling back the curtain. You are about to see why heaven keeps certain lives on earth far longer than expected. There is a revelation coming that may shift the way you see aging, purpose, calling, and even the elderly around you. Before we go deeper, pause and take a moment to engage spiritually. If you feel the weight of what is being revealed, declare it by liking this message and comment the phrase, "God still has a purpose for me." Share this teaching with someone who needs hope in their later years, and let this act be a seed of faith. Let me take you into a story, a parable of sorts about a man named Elias. He was 74 years old, a quiet man living in a forgotten village, tucked away between hills and forests. The world had changed around him. Friends had passed on, family had scattered, and the rhythms that once fueled his days had slowed. Elias would sometimes sit outside his small wooden home, watching the sun fall behind the mountains, wondering why God had kept him alive this long. In his younger years, Elias had been a blacksmith, strong-armed and sharp-minded. He had forged tools for farmers, crafted hinges for homes, repaired wagons, and shaped iron with fire and resolve. But now his hands trembled, his back curved, and his strength had faded into a mere shadow of memory. Often he'd whisper to God, "Why am I still here? What purpose is left for an old man like me?" Every evening he waited for an answer, but the heavens seemed silent. One morning Elias woke with a burden on his heart, a gentle nudge, soft yet persistent. It felt like a wordless invitation, a quiet instruction pulling him toward the forest trail behind his home. He had walked that trail many times before, but this time the stirring within him felt different. He sensed something sacred was waiting, though he couldn't explain it. He leaned on his wooden staff, stepped onto the path, and began his slow journey down the winding trail. The forest was alive with the sound of birds, the whispering of leaves, and the crunch of earth beneath his feet. It felt as though creation itself was quietly watching him, waiting for something to unfold. About an hour into his walk, Elias heard a faint sound, a soft cry, almost like a small animal in distress. He followed the noise until he reached a clearing, where a young boy no more than 12 sat on the ground with his face buried in his arms. The boy was trembling, trying to muffle his sobs. Elias approached slowly. "Son," he said in a gentle voice, "are you hurt?" The boy lifted his face, eyes red and swollen. "No, not hurt," he said, "just lost." Elias helped him sit up. "What's your name?" "Micah," the boy whispered. Elias noticed the child's backpack lying nearby. The boy explained that he had traveled into the forest to escape the shouting at home. His parents had been fighting for weeks, and he felt invisible, unheard, unwanted, and overwhelmed. He wandered too far, and now he couldn't find his way back. Elias listened quietly. He didn't rush to speak. His years taught him that deep pains require space to breathe before they can heal. When the boy finished, Elias took a deep breath and said, "Micah, when I was your age, I felt the same way. My home was loud with anger too, and I often ran away to quiet places thinking no one cared." He leaned closer. "But you are not alone, and you are not forgotten." His voice carried a weight the boy didn't expect, a gravity born from decades of surviving storms, losses, and loneliness. Elias took Micah's hand and said, "Come, I will walk with you." Together, they slowly retraced the path through the forest. The boy stayed close to him, occasionally leaning on Elias's arm for reassurance. As they walked, Elias shared pieces of his past, the hardships he endured, the mistakes he made, the forgiveness he found, and the God who carried him through it all. Micah listened with wide eyes. He had never heard anyone speak of God with such tenderness and conviction. The old man's quiet faith felt different from the sermons he had heard at home. Elias's voice didn't sound like a pastor preaching from a distance. It sounded like a living testimony wrapped in warmth and humility. When they finally reached the outskirts of the village, The boy's parents were already searching frantically. The moment they saw him, they ran to him in tears. They embraced him, apologizing for the tension he had been forced to carry alone. In the midst of the emotional reunion, the father turned to Elias. With tears in his eyes, he said, "Thank you, sir. Thank you for saving my son." Elias shook his head. "No," he said softly, "I just walked where God led me." But that day marked more than a reunion. It became the beginning of healing in that family. The father sought help for his anger. The mother rediscovered her strength, and the household slowly transformed into a place of peace. And it all began with the simple obedience of an elderly man who thought his life no longer had meaning. The story does not end there. A few weeks later, Micah visited Elias again. This time he came with a notebook. "I want to write down everything you told me," he said shily. "I want to remember it." Elias smiled. "Why?" Because the boy said, "You speak like someone who knows things I need to learn, and I want to learn." Elias was stunned. For years, he felt like nothing more than a fading shadow, a forgotten relic. But now here was a young boy hungry to learn from him, drawn not to the strength of his arms, but to the strength of his spirit. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. And over time, Elias and Micah formed a bond that bridged generations. The village began to notice the quiet transformation in the young boy. And soon other children and even adults started visiting Elias. They asked for stories, advice, prayers, and wisdom. The old man's home became a sanctuary of counsel, laughter, and healing. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with warm colors, Elias felt the same gentle nudge he felt the day he found Micah. The whisper of God's presence filled his chest. And it was then that the truth finally dawned upon him. He whispered, "Lord, this is why you kept me. Not for labor, not for productivity, not for accomplishment, but for influence, for impartation, for legacy, for the passing of wisdom that only years could produce." Elias realized that the strength of youth builds, but the wisdom of age restores. The passion of the young ignites, but the steadiness of the elder anchors. The energy of one generation moves things forward, but the discernment of another ensures they move in the right direction. His purpose had not ended at 60. It had only shifted. And somewhere in that small village, long before Elias was ever born, God had already written into his story that the latter years of his life would be the most fruitful, the most impactful, the most eternally significant. God preserved him not to extend his past, but to ensure someone else's future. This is the hidden truth many overlook. God does not keep the elderly on earth because their purpose is fading, but because the fullness of their purpose is finally ready to be poured out. Scripture is rich with examples of God preserving the elderly, not as spectators of life, but as carriers of divine wisdom, spiritual authority, and generational guidance. When the Bible speaks of old age, it does not speak of irrelevance or decline. It speaks of glory, endurance, and purpose refined through years of walking with God. Psalm 92:14 says something profound. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green. This is not poetic optimism. This is divine intention. God ordained that the elderly are not simply living out a remainder. They are positioned to bear fruit, not merely physical labor, but spiritual fruit, wisdom, counsel, prayer covering, discernment, intercession, guidance, generational interconnection, and the irreplaceable testimony of a life preserved by grace. Proverbs 16:31 adds, "Gray hair is a crown of splendor. It is attained in the way of righteousness." In other words, age is not a curse. It is a crown, a badge of battle survived, a symbol of wisdom earned, a testimony of God's sustaining hand. The modern world sadly undervalues age. In a culture obsessed with youth, speed, trends, and the new, the elderly often feel sidelined. Yet psychologically, the later stages of life are the most introspective and wisdom-rich. Aging reshapes priorities. It softens pride. It amplifies gratitude. It clarifies what truly matters. The mind becomes more reflective, more discerning, more anchored, whereas youth is about acquisition of experiences, status, knowledge. Old age is about distillation, what remains after decades of testing and refinement. This is why God often entrusts the elderly with assignments tied to counsel and influence rather than physical exertion. An older heart sees life differently. It sees patterns. It sees consequences. It sees the long arc of God's faithfulness. It can detect danger sooner and recognize divine opportunities faster because it has walked through both triumphs and tragedies. Psychologists describe this as generativity, the desire and ability to invest in the next generation. It is a natural developmental stage, but Scripture elevates it to a spiritual mandate. God preserved Anna, the elderly prophetess, specifically to witness and declare the identity of the Messiah. Luke 2:36-38. Her old age was not passive. It carried prophetic authority. God preserved Moses until 120 years old because Israel needed leadership that knew the voice of God intimately, especially in the wilderness. God preserved Caleb into his 80s because the younger warriors needed an example of faith that refused to bow to fear. In each case, their advanced age was the vessel for their assignment, not an obstacle to it. And herein lies the stunning truth. Many people aren't kept alive because of what they were meant to do in their youth, but because of what they were destined to release in their later years. God often preserves lives past 60 because he intends to use their wisdom as a stabilizing force in families, churches, and communities. He preserves them because their testimony carries a weight younger voices cannot replicate. He preserves them because someone's deliverance is tied to their prayers. Someone's direction is hidden in their counsel. Someone's breakthrough is connected to their endurance. Some of the strongest spiritual warriors are elderly, quiet, unseen, but powerful in prayer. They are the intercessors who wake in the night with someone's name burning on their heart. They are the grandparents whose prayers keep families from falling apart. They are the elders whose stories anchor the faith of an entire community. Heaven knows their worth even if the world overlooks them. And this is crucial to understand. God's silence in the elderly years is often misinterpreted. When God grows quiet, it is not because he is finished with someone. It is because he is preparing them to pour out something greater. Silence often precedes commissioning. Stillness often precedes assignment. The quiet phase is a positioning phase. You see this pattern throughout Scripture. Before Moses led Israel, God was silent during 40 years in the wilderness. Before Samuel became a prophetic voice, there was a long period where the word of the Lord was rare. Before Jesus began his ministry, there were 30 silent years. Silence is not the end of purpose. It is the preparation for purpose. When elderly men and women feel God withdrawing his voice, it is not abandonment. It is alignment. God is positioning them for influence, not through strength, but through wisdom, not through movement, but through presence, not through authority in society, but authority in the Spirit. And the psychological dimension supports this. In later life, emotional reactivity decreases, empathy deepens, and reflective wisdom increases. The mind shifts from what can I build to what can I impart. God designed the aging brain to naturally align with the spiritual assignment of those later years: mentorship, legacy, intercession, and stabilizing influence. So when God keeps someone alive past 60, he is preserving a vessel of wisdom, a carrier of generational blessing, a guardian of spiritual continuity. Hear this clearly. If you are watching this and you are past 60, God has not extended your life by accident. Heaven has preserved you because your presence still matters on this earth more than you realize. You are not standing in the shadow of your former years. You are standing in the fullness of your appointed years. Everything you have survived, every tear you have shed, every battle that brushed you but did not break you, these have shaped you into a vessel heaven can trust. God is not finished with you. You are entering the chapter you were created for. There are prayers you have prayed that will be answered through your voice in this season. There are people whose lives will shift because of a sentence you share, a story you reveal, a truth you impart. Your endurance has become your ministry. Your scars have become your sermons. Your testimony is oil being poured into a younger generation, starving for wisdom. And hear this prophetic word. The years you believed were wasted are becoming the years God will use to multiply impact. Your later years are not a decline. They are a deployment. Your age is not a limitation. It is a mantle. God has kept you because someone needs what only you carry. A family needs the stability that flows from your faith. A community needs the grounding that comes from your discernment. A soul wandering in confusion needs the wisdom you've gained from decades of walking with God. You have become a bridge between what was and what will be. Do not believe the lie that your strength is fading, and therefore your purpose is fading. Purpose does not live in muscles or speed. Purpose lives in spirit. And your spirit has never been richer, deeper, or more anchored than it is now. You are stepping into a prophetic season where God will use your presence to bring clarity, to bring comfort, to bring conviction, and to bring direction. You will speak fewer words, but they will carry more weight. You will walk slower, but you will walk with greater authority. Your prayers will shake things unseen. Your wisdom will save people from falling. Your life will become the evidence that God preserves those he intends to use powerfully. So receive this truth. You are not here because you have outlived your time. You are here because your time has arrived. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this message. It means you are hungry for truth, hungry for clarity, and hungry for God's voice in this season of life. Whether it is your own journey or the journey of someone you love, you didn't watch this by accident. You were drawn here because this word was meant to meet you where you are. Now, I want to invite you to respond not for algorithms, but as an act of agreement with what God has spoken today. Take a moment and comment the phrase, "My purpose is still alive." Let that declaration be your stand against every lie that told you your best years are gone. Your words carry power, and when you write them, you are aligning your heart with heaven's truth about your life. If this message stirred something in you, if it confirmed what you've been sensing,